Urban Talks. Today with Studio Adept from Denmark, and we are going to explore their work. We will talk about the case studies, we will see how they approach according to architecture and design, public space and landscaping, and we will talk their work. You will be able to ask questions, you can join the discussion. If you're sitting here in camp, welcome. You can just raise your hand after that and we will pass you a microphone. I will have my colleague here and he will help me with it. And if you are watching the stream, welcome to camp also, and you can join our Slido. That works also for you, so if you're shy and you don't want to talk to us, it's no problem. You can ask questions via Slido. The QR code for Slido is on one side and the transcript is on the other side, and you can use transcript for both languages, for Czech and for English, so it's for you if you would like to understand better and for you if you prefer Czech language. And also you can join the Slido. If you don't like to scan the QR code, you can just type it into your browser. It's a simple link, slido.com, and you will use hashtag Urban Talks, and you will be able to ask us a question, and I will see them here, and we can start the discussion after the lecture. After the lecture of co-founding partner of ADEPT, Anders Lonka, and I would like to invite him to our stage and give him a floor. Welcome to camp. And welcome to camp. After a few months, you won the competition for the Piazzetta in front of the Fairmont Prague. So welcome, and I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. I've been looking forward to speak a bit about our work today. My talk today is called Local Conditions and Global Responsibilities. And I'm going to try to go a little bit through our process about how we develop the projects we do in the office. And I'm going to try to show you a couple of examples of that. Our studio is based in Copenhagen, or grew up in Copenhagen. We are around, today we employ around 70 people, which are landscape designers, architects, and urban planners. And we try to work across these three disciplines. I think this element of working across these different scales has always been quite an important element in the studio. And it's something that has informed, you would say, each of the scales, each of the way of working. And it's something I'm going to talk a lot about today. We have an office today in Nebo in Copenhagen and one in Altona in Hamburg. And we are mostly working in kind of northern middle Europe, but principally globally. So I think these are you would say the three promises we make when we start a project, and it's all about, in a way, on one hand, really looking at what global responsibilities are there, which things do we need to deal with in terms of that. Then it's about really taking the places seriously. We always say place over building. And then it's also coming from a reading of different communities and people. So I think that addressing this really requires quite a humble approach, where we understand that we're only we're only one part of a development of a project. And I think this is crucial when we want to develop something that comes from a place and that doesn't just come from kind of our notion of what architecture should be like. And this is done generally in the office through this, you would say, like a scenario-based strategy and a dialogue-oriented development process, where we all the time use different methods, of course, but where we try to present all ideas and present all scenarios rather than just come up with one approach. I think, I'm going to start out to talk about some of the tools that we use mainly in order to develop our projects in a more kind of circular design approach. And I think maybe they're going to be interesting to see as a starting point and also to understand our general project. I think it's in a way very simple, this approach for a more circular future, and it's really comes from an overall understanding that today, at least in Denmark, we see that 70% of the embodied carbon in buildings are kind of created before the building is ever used. So I think for now we've been working a lot with the operational carbon footprint of buildings. But what we see now is that the main carbon footprint of new buildings come from the construction of them. So we've moved, you would say, from a more kind of looking at the operations and looking at the energy use of a building towards looking at the actual materials that the buildings use, where they're placed, if they are transformation or newly built. This, of course, has to then be done much, how would you say, like more initially in the process. So you have to implement these things quite early in the process. And we use a couple of different things. First of all, we kind of have, you would say, like a catalog of different carbon use of different materials when we develop projects. So we're all the time trying to, you would say, update this catalog and look at how the different materials are used in different places of the buildings. And of course, trying to use more of the lower carbon materials than of the higher ones. Then we are also trying to understand how we can kind of separate elements of the building in kind of more kind of looking at the organic materials versus the more technical materials, the ones that are grown versus the ones that are, how do you say, like taking out of the ground. And maybe most importantly and most complex of all is that we use iterative life cycle analysis to develop these things. And I think that this is something that is currently in quite a fast development in our office in Denmark in general. But it's also something that demands quite a lot of power when we do this. So what we try to do is that we try to look at the buildings and the public spaces we do and look at the components we use and then analyze a part of the building. And by doing so, we're able to all the time iterative optimize each of the carbon footprint of each of the materials. And this is also, of course, done from an understanding of where are the main drivers of the footprints of the buildings, where do they lie in the building, which elements do we have to look at first. And then also an understanding of what are the interchangeable elements of a building and how do we make them interchangeable. How do we create design for disassembly so the buildings we build can be used as material banks for the future and not only as a resource user. And then you would say maybe to an extent, most importantly, it's also understanding the different lifespans of the different components of a building or a public space. So really looking at what are the main elements of the structures, where of course structure is the one that lasts the longest and elements within are much less lasting. But all of this comes from kind of a sense of place, and I think that when I talk about local conditions and when I talk about creating this sense of place, it's really about how we can use our buildings to make the spaces around them better, to make the neighborhoods, the environments they live in better, rather than to look at them as individual icons that are for their own use. This is a project. I'm going to go through a couple of projects now. This is a project we did in Køge, outside of Copenhagen, where we built a building that is fully designed for disassembly, to be taken apart and rebuilt again. And it's also fully designed on a modular system. It's here you see the location. It's on the edge of the city, in kind of in between a former industrial harbor that is under development and a kind of historic city center. So this kind of, in a way, translates and becomes this beginning of this former industrial area. This building used to stand there a long time ago and was torn down when we got to the place. We managed to keep the foundation of the building, to build upon that. And this is really the basis of the design of the building. What you see in these kind of industrial buildings is that they used to have the big roofs that are light-based, and then a more, how do you say, like permanent, massive base that could handle more harder conditions from all the traffic and all the use of the buildings. So this is really the design of the building and the components of the building, and each of them are, again, you would say, developed through this kind of iterative LCA analysis of how we can optimize each component. But the overall design and the overall combination of things are developed from the specific site conditions. So this is the building process. That's the former foundation of the existing building that used to be there, that has been used for the new building. And kind of the main structure in steel and the secondary structure in wood construction. And this is the final building in its context. And I think that this intention of creating this, you would say, a big roof that stands on this base was something that also invites people into the building and creates this kind of inviting arrival to this industrial harbor. The building is quite simple. Towards the east that gets the morning sun, we have the restaurant that works at night, so it doesn't get overheated. And towards the west that gets the evening sun, we have the morning cafe that works in the morning, so it doesn't get overheated. And then on top we have community spaces. Inside, what you also see is that we've built the building without a painter coming into the building, so all materials are natural and untreated. So again, that's part of the strategy of being able to separate the elements again and reuse them in the future. And it's also part of the strategy of not using chemicals inside. So I think like one of the things in that is that we also have to start to get used to a different kind of you would say aesthetics, where we accept the materials as they are, and we don't plaster over them, we don't paint over them, but we kind of keep them raw and simple. This is the central core of the building, and this is the bathrooms that are done by reused tiles from the local reused, how to say, community space. And this is the arrival into the new harbor, where you see this kind of main shelf that holds the core of the building and becomes an exhibition for the place. It's done by a local craft brewery that has done this building as a kind of community space for the new urban area. Yeah, this is from the inside. The shelf is also built by components, so instead of making it a big inbuilt shelf, each of them are individual components that are put together on site and then creates this full shelf. And the steel plates of the roofs are continuous and clicked onto each other, so you have like a top shelf and a lower shelf to separate each of them independently. Yeah. This is a project that we are doing right now in Oslo, where we are doing also a mixed-use housing development at the harbor front, also in this former industrial context that is being redeveloped in the inner city. It's close to the opera, to the Bjergvika area. It's called Grønlikaia. It's a project that's ongoing at the moment. You know where Oslo is. So this is the location here, where you have the opera here and the main station here, the inner city here, and this is the industrial harbor that is being transformed at the moment. I think one of the special conditions of this site is that what you do have is that you have this site here in the foreground, and in the background you have what's called the Egeberg, which is a big landscape. So you have this background of the trees and of the mountain, and then you have the foreground of the water and the fjord. And we wanted to express that in the building design. So we have these more massive housing units, more kind of classical block housing units, and then you have the more small scale light units that are positioned towards the water. So you get this kind of difference in scale where you have the urban backbone of the area, and then you have the small scale that comes in front. This relates to the general, you would say, master plan of the area. So this is how it looks, where you have these, you would say, blocks, massive blocks in the background that has the green facades, and then you have the smaller wooden construction in front. It's all built in full wood construction with CLT decks and glulam buildings, and this is part of also this analysis I was showing in the beginning, where you have where we are constantly trying to optimize each of the components. And the reason why we've also developed this specific structure was by using some different tools to optimize the local climate in between the buildings and in the center of the buildings. So on an overall level, this is an example where we how to say, reduce the CO2 footprint of the buildings with around 80%. So just by taking each of the individual materials and going through an LCA optimizations, you can really reduce the overall footprint of the new buildings. This is some views going through them. Basically, the inside of the apartments will get this kind of classical harbor feeling, where you have the classical stock buildings of the harbor with the glulam construction and the big spans, and outside of the buildings will have this terraced situation for the apartments, giving this green front. The facades of the buildings are made with a company called Stone Cycle in Holland, where we are using material extraction from construction waste and building them into tile components that you see here for the different buildings, and then using them to clad the front facades. And of course the front buildings are done in full wood and wood facades. So these are some of the views in and around this new development. One of the other things that we wanted to do was that we wanted to instead of extending the harbor, which was proposed, we wanted to put the new buildings that are by the water on columns. So instead of taking, you would say, the biodiversity out of the fjord, we are adding instead like these column structures that holds the light building. We can do that simply by not building so dense as was in the program, and by kind of using that as a biodiversity factor for the fjord. Yeah. I think I'm gonna jump to the next project. This is the in-between space we're creating. And I think there's a lot to be said about this development, but I think what's happening right now in Oslo is that they are radically moving towards a much more sustainable way of building, and also using the materials they have locally, which is primarily timber, both for structural decks, for structural elements throughout the buildings. Up until these buildings will be at the maximum 7 floors high. Yeah. So this is the view from the fjord. This next project is the School of Architecture in Aarhus, in Denmark, which is in many ways trying to show our approach to building, where we've been we were part of a larger competition for this new school. There's 2 schools in Denmark, one in Aarhus and one in Copenhagen, 2 schools of architecture. and this is located in where the railway used to come into the city, in an area that has been developing over time to become this quite nice informal development that has happened on these railway tracks. So we wanted to create a building that would, in a way, engage with this environment and not remove it. Instead of, you would say, seeing it as something that should just disappear again, we saw it as a resource for the new school. This is where the school is located today, which is in a lot of or used to be located in a lot of the old buildings of the city center. And this is really a big part of the DNA of the school, was to really be building on construction, doing large models and doing large elements. We all, the 3 founding partners of the office, all studied at this school in Aarhus. So it was quite a special thing to be part of the competition. And we wanted to really use this DNA of the school as a driver for the architecture, rather than bring you would say, bring a new icon to the city. So the school is in a way made as a kind of simple framework that the students should inhabit and be part of developing, and should become part of this, you would say, do-it-yourself area, which is in the environment. So it steps down from the more urban scale on the back to this small scale that you have in front with the informal development, and it leaves the former tracks that used to come into the area here in front of the school as a free element. This is the back of the school, the urban part. So the intention was that this integration of the informal and the formal, of the formality of the new school would flow together, and that the feeling of this new school should not be too extrusive from these kind of central views of the existing development. So the school inside consists of what we call the tool towers, which are essentially like a small city within the building that holds all the, you would say, more hardcore functions of the school, all the workshops, all the more kind of technical equipment or technical spaces of the school. And then it consists of these large flexible spaces that happens in the section of the building. No space is less than 4.8 in height in order for the students to really inhabit and develop it. After building the school, we've held a series of competitions inside for elements. So this is one of the competitions I'll show you in a minute, which is for the school library that sits within the bigger structure, you would say. We're doing a competition now for this space, where we'll have a new kind of in-between study space that will happen in the same way with kind of wood construction within the overall frame. And the idea is that the school should feel like a workshop, something that changes all the time, and not something that is a static piece of architecture. So this is the cantina of the school today, and these are the simple flexible study halls, where we have the benches along the facade, and this is the new library that has been developed recently in the project. And so I think that this is really trying to create architecture as a framework for life, rather than architecture being this kind of defining element. So this is the workshop that can flow out into the informal spaces that you see behind. And this is the workshop in a different condition, where it opens up to this central section of the building. And these are some of the terraces that come along. One of the other things that we wanted to do was to develop the landscape around the building as something that was done together with the students. So what we did was that we used all different elements that was used in the construction, that was surplus from the construction, and used that as the new landscape elements, and laid it out in this structure that related to the former railway elements. And then we also did a bioscraping of the surroundings together with the students before building. So we were able to bring back the different surfaces and the different environment that was already there once built. So this is how it's developing today. And this is the school in its context with it's called Institute for X, this informal development that is mostly done by students or former students of the school. And they are now being allowed to take over the terraces of the school. So they will build up over the school. This is now we're coming into a more, you would say, like historic context, like less industrial heritage areas. This is a project in Berlin that we're building at the moment. It's a transformation of a building called the Marienhaus, and it will be used in the future for the City Museum of Berlin. It's lying here on the edge of Museumsinsel. That you probably know, and this is the historic building from the beginning of the century, of last century. It has been neglected for around 40 years, and so it's filled inside with graffiti and plants growing over the building, and the intention in the project was to refurbish this and recreate these surfaces and simply make them nice again. This is the attic. What we wanted to do was to keep these conditions, keep these walls, and keep the facade of the building without changing that fully, and instead you would say build in a kind of 7-story new museum inside of the existing. So this is the new museum that is built within the existing frame, and this will create this kind of conditions where you're all the time moving between you would say like a newly built wood construction and this kind of beautiful historic building with all its layers of graffiti and use over time. So these are views from the foyer of the building, where this new building inside will become, you would say, like a kind of will live together with what used to be, and where the surfaces here you see we've now finished the roof that we had to take down and refurbish offsite and add to it again, and we've taken out the decks that used to be in the building, and now we are starting to construct the new museum, you would say, inside this shell. So from the outside, you actually don't see it as a construction place. You see the building as it used to be. This is a transformation and an addition to an existing building in Copenhagen, in Carlsberg area of Copenhagen, where if you've been to Copenhagen, you might know the Elephant Gate, which is quite a famous city landmark that defines the entrance to what used to be the breweries of the city. Our building is kind of a combination of an existing building and a newly development in connection to this. And what we wanted to do was somehow to make the two merge and become complementary to each other. So this is the old building and this is the new building. And so we took inspiration from the existing brick pattern that used to be in and used that to develop a stone that creates the three-dimensional brick pattern of the new building. Another element we added was that we managed to find a kind of photo archive of what used to be inside the building, which used to be a yeast laboratory for the brewery, and it was developed in the 50s, almost kind of this Apollo-like scenes of the different scientists developing and using this as a production facility. So we took these images and made them into these kind of graphical components that we then kind of transformed into the gates and the entrance spaces. So by making these CNC cut metal surfaces that gives entrance, during the night you kind of feel the images, and during the day you feel the images, and then at night they light up to become kind of a story of what used to be there. So this special stone kind of becomes less and less as you go up to create this kind of, you would say, human scale detail, and also to keep the budget of the project as we go up, but also to create this transition that we thought would be really interesting. This is another transformation in a central city. It's called Haus der Musik, and it's in Braunschweig, which is outside of Hamburg. We just started redeveloping it. This is a competition proposal. We just started, you would say, detailing the project. It's in the historic center of the city, and it's a transformation of this how do you say, like old Kaufmann building, which was a urban mall that had a very kind of how do you say, like special facade that we used as an inspiration for the new building, but also had quite a robust structure that we have reused fully. So basically what we've done is that we will remove the facade and use that again for the new facade. It's a slate facade, very beautiful. And then we are reusing the existing structure and then placing again a kind of wooden construction on top of that. So the existing concrete structure will become a music school, and on top of that there will be this concert hall for the city. So this is the section of the building, and inside, as you arrive into the building, you get this combination of new and old. And as you get up, you get the new concert hall on top, and the section of the music school in the existing. The facade is kind of built, again, as a kind of transformation of this facade that used to be there, done into, you would say, a more contemporary expression, and done into an element that opens especially up more in the ground floor to create this kind of public character of the building. Yeah, maybe finally I'll go through a couple of, or at least one landscape project here, which is a transformation of you would say, like the full street network of a city in Denmark called Aabenraa. It's on the edge between the border of Denmark and Germany, and it's a beautiful old Hansestad, the city center. But it had been developed with cars over time. We did not manage to get the cars out of the city center, but we managed to transform the streetscape to become something that was a much more kind of fluent character, becoming more of a urban space rather than just a kind of car streets for the city. So what we took was kind of finding historic images of the city, how it used to be, and how we could maybe recreate these kind of central street to relate to the history of the city. And today the project is just finishing up with mainly, again, it's streets, but also creating a series of pockets to stay in. And really changing, you would say, the character of something that used to be car-based into something that is much more for everybody, for all types of transport. Yeah. But I think I'm going to try to stop here, so we have some time for a talk and for questions, if you have any. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I will ask my colleague if he will help me with chairs, and we can check if there are some questions from you, and of course I will have some. You spent some time in Prague now. If you compare public space in Prague, and if you compare how we care about the city, compared to Denmark, for example, compared to Copenhagen, because for us, Copenhagen is inspiration. It's something that we talk about all the time. It became boring almost. What was your first impression? Because I always envy that someone has the first impression of Prague. What was yours?
I mean, I think the first expression comes from doing the Ramscape project, so arriving to Prague 1 and kind of course, experiencing the quite extraordinary UNESCO Heritage City Center. So I think in many ways that is quite different from Copenhagen, where the central city is much more diverse and complex, for better and worse, you would say. So that was my first experience.
Can you even stop working when you're visiting other cities? Is it possible to, see the surroundings of the city around you and not thinking about how things should be designed and how they should work?
I don't know. Isn't it? I don't know. Most architects I think it's a fantastic thing that you go to different cities and enjoy looking at architecture and looking at public spaces and different neighborhoods, and that becomes part of the experience. But I wouldn't call it work, maybe. At least not hard work.
I was walking around and checking pavements and trees and details, and it's not possible to stop thinking about it. So I'm asking if it's some kind of a disease or something like that.
It is maybe. It helps when you bring kids, then it becomes a bit harder to, to look at the pavement.
Always like that, yeah. So once again, thank you very much for your lecture. And as I mentioned, there's a chance for you to ask any question. We have seen a lot of inspiring work and a lot of projects that we don't have seen here in Czech Republic for a long time. We are always struggling, not Czech Republic, sorry, I meant Prague. We kind of struggling in Prague with the new projects. We are waiting, a lot of them, to be realized and finished around Prague. So thank you for that inspiration. And if you have anything to ask, it will all, of course, be welcomed. So feel free to mention anything. I asked, yes, thank you.
Good evening. Thank you so much for the lecture. I'm interested in the topics of circular economy, as you introduced it at the very beginning of the presentation. The road towards circular economy is burdened by many hurdles, I believe. Do you get any support in this, maybe from the government or municipalities, for example, like Oslo? Do they actually require that these criteria are sort of met in the new buildings? And maybe do they actually support you? Or do they just prescribe it as a must and then leave you to deal with it somehow? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good and important question. So thank you for that. It changes a bit in different cities, but especially in Denmark now, it's by law to get a building permit, you have to do a full LCA calculation. And each year the CO2 footprint per square meter gets lower and lower. So I think that has been an enormous support, both in terms of starting to work with LCA calculation as an iterative element in the design, but also now it's getting so low that it's actually changing the industry of how we build. We've built with concrete forever in Denmark. And on one hand, you see that the big concrete factories are actually start to do carbon capture and do a lot of things to be able to still be on the market. And on the other hand, you also see that especially, of course, the more smaller buildings are becoming wood construction.
Another question about the recycling and circular economy. I've seen that it's kind of a, I don't want to say trend, but I've seen that a few times in last years, that there is a striving to recycle the building on the place when it stands. So you do the reconstruction, and there is a percentage of material that was used on the place that not even left the building side. What do you think about that? Do you think it's something that it really happens to, you know, be neutral in some way, be effective, etc., or is something like a game that you are trying what is even possible? And do you think it has too big influence on how the building actually look like at the end?
I mean, I think it's really relevant to start discussing how much we tear down, and being very much more careful about tearing things down. I think this is something that is changing fast in Denmark, at least, and I think we've for way too long been taking down buildings too easily, only keeping, you would say, heritage buildings. And I think we need to value everything today, just because of their carbon footprint. So we need to value structure, we need to value also ugly buildings and see how we can transform those. And of course, in some cases, you have to do something, also because of functional changes. And there, I think it's absolutely possible to use some of the materials in a different way, like we do in Haus der Musik. But of course, it is something that cannot be done with everything, and especially not with newer buildings. Actually, what you've seen in Denmark, all the old brick buildings from before 1950 in Denmark can be disassembled and put together again. The bricks are whole; they're done with lime mortar. From the 50s, we started using concrete mortar, which is stronger than the bricks. So then all the bricks buildings from after 1950 cannot be taken apart and put together again. At least not with anywhere near the same economy, because they simply break the bricks before the mortar. So yeah.
You have presented the project in Braunschweig. Actually, there was an interesting project from the last Mies van den Rohe, the study pavilion in Braunschweig, and we have seen the project that was in very center of the city. And what was the discussion about the building of the house with facade like this next to the heritage buildings that were there, because we have seen them on the picture. Yeah. Was it complicated to discuss that? Because, for example, the Braunschweig project, the study pavilion from Mies van den Rohe onwards, it was next to the old building of the university, the oldest building in the campus, and the discussion was there, a very difficult one. What was the case of the building on the square?
Yeah, I mean, it used to have this, you would say, slate semi-modern building, which was standing on the square. So I think that made it easier to do something that built on that, and not only on the historic context. And I think that also was part of the choice from our side was because we felt that also had a quality as a heritage in itself, even though it didn't look like its surroundings. And I think also many people it was built by a very famous architect from Braunschweig. So I think maybe many people from the city also had a feeling towards that old Kaufmann building that had its own charm in a way. So I think we tried to use that to make the new building, and that helped in the process.
Any other questions? Anyone? Feel free to ask. Just raise your hand and Otto will pass you a microphone. I like the project of the school. Actually people they did it, you know, during the do-it-yourself process or something like that. And is it something, you know, memorable for the building, in the meaning that people actually they understand that it means something more for them when they help with the project, when they are shaping it, etc. Because I remember when I was young, I helped to build a playground next to our elementary school, and I'm proud till today. When I walk around it with my son, I was like, I built it. Is it something that is memorable for them? It is more powerful in the meaning that they understand the location and the context of the place better.
I mean, I think it's made the building very much an integrated part of the school DNA in a very fast period of time. It was a competition against I think Big and Sana and a lot of quite famous offices, and they all did very beautiful projects, but also you would say also very kind of defined pieces of architecture, defined iconic pieces of architecture that, and I think we won the competition by taking a very different approach and saying this is not to create a masterpiece. This is to create a workshop for the students. And I think the students have really embraced that. They're all the time changing the things and building big stuff in there.
Is that something that is in the Danish DNA, that you are like that you are actually want to be part of the change, you actually want to be part of things being built, and you are allowed to be part of it when you are kids, for example? Because when we see things like that, they are... I don't think they are quite common, but it's not that easy to find them in Czech Republic, for example. But when I see projects from Denmark and Scandinavian countries, I see them more often. I see them like something that, okay, and we did that, of course, because it's great to connect kids and children with the place when they will spend so much time in the future.
I don't know. I mean, we all grew up with Jan right, and human scale and putting people first and stuff like that. So I think there's a certain degree of informality in the way we design, and a certain degree of not being too serious about ourselves. But yeah.
So you talk about it like that you grow up with the young girl ideas. Something that it's, you know, widely known around the society, that you have these ideas somewhere under the skin.
I don't know if society, but within architecture, right? There's only 2 schools in Denmark, so he was a professor at both, and so basically he taught a generation of architects. So everybody knows him really well. In that sense, and I think that it's the ideas of this kind of human approach and that has become a very integrated part of city development and how you do cultural places and how you do new public spaces for quite some years in Denmark now. So I think that has had definitely an impact on a lot of people.
Okay, so once again, I'll ask you, great. I'll pass you a microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. You have some projects here in Prague, and have you faced any problems with the historical requirements here, or have you felt like it's harder to build something modern here than anywhere else you have projects now? Thank you.
I mean, we've won some projects and we're just starting to develop them now. I think that we are very inspired by places and local conditions. So for example, when we get a chance to do a project in Prague 1 in kind of a central public space, our focus would not be to do something modern. I think our focus would be to do something that in a way can add to that. And then, of course, we do have a way of designing that is integrated within us. But I think that what we get excited about is creating something that feels like part of the place and feels like something that supports the surroundings, rather than something that should necessarily feel modern and new. But I mean, I haven't had the first meeting with the heritage part of the city, so I think like one of the things that we're introducing, I had a talk about the Ramscape project earlier today, so that's why I didn't bring it tonight. But one of the things that we are introducing and discussing in the project is that we have like new climate conditions that are creating heat islands. So we are challenging the notion of kind of street, park, public space as something that are totally different from each other, and trying to bring a kind of a tree canopy into a public space in Prague 1. So we are planting a lot of trees in the new plaza, and I think that is something that will, you would say, be a discussion. But we hope to get it through. I mean, yeah, I think that there's a danger of. It's not such a big problem in Denmark, honestly, with heat islands. We have more like stormwater problems, but I think it's not only in Prague, but in a lot of historic city centers in Middle Europe. You have this. You have the increasing heat in the summer, and we cannot keep making these kind of open plazas that are without green elements. We have to try to bring in a kind of new condition there.
Okay, thank you. Another question, anyone? Yeah, okay.
Hi, I don't have a question, but I'm very surprised that I'm meeting someone, or you, because I admired when I was in Copenhagen, in Carlsberg. The most beautiful building was this with the red bricks, which you showed us. It's quite amazing, and all these details, and so I'm glad I can see who made it, who is so.
Thank you.
Thank
nice.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. The question of preserving and the heritage, etc., it's kind of a wide topic, and I'm just interested if you have something like a framework to how to think about these things, because there is a huge difference between creating something new, like in Prague, that will become part of something that is around there and is preserved very strictly, and trying to build something new in a building that is kind of a heritage architecture, but is in the discussion of being turned down or, changed into something new. How you're changing between these two positions, like you have to absolutely respect what is around it, or you're bringing something new that is different but is able to save the heritage and preserve what's there. Is it difficult to adapt the thinking of the Preservance Office here in Prague, for example, or interpret, defend your position when you're explaining some maybe radical project that will save the heritage somewhere else?
Can you? I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
For example, the building that you showed us, that there is the new museum built inside of the building.
Yeah.
And it means you're creating new structures that will be able to save the old ones.
Yeah.
So you are actually creating a new meaning for the building. But when you're in Prague, you're creating something very, very different from things that are around there and something that you have to defend. And both of these topics are focused on preservance, focused on the history of the place, etc. So this is just a question how you're switching between these two positions.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, when we're working in Raumscape, we are also kind of fully committed, you would say, to the mosaic landscape of the inner city. So I think, of course, it's kind of. I think it's about respecting what's there and not necessarily thinking that you need to change everything, but also accepting, of course, the things that needs to be changes. I mean, I think that we're getting so many global spaces, right? There's so many new developments around the world that looks more or less the same. So when you have an extraordinary existing condition that you can support, you should do it. And that can be both like an informal industrial heritage development, as it can be a very kind of extraordinary UNESCO World Heritage city center. Yeah. So I think that it's in the end, it's just about making something that makes the place and the surroundings and the neighborhood a little bit better, rather than being, its own victory, you would say.
Thank you. Anyone? A question? I have here one from Slido, or two actually. One is about the education, something that I wanted to talk before. What do you believe is the most important factor in Danish education to help children become open-minded and creative?
I don't know if I can talk about Danish education as a whole. I've been teaching at the schools both in Copenhagen and in Aarhus, and I think that what makes them work well is really, this kind of hands-on project-based approach, where everything you learn, being architectural history or being how to build things, are done with your hands and with kind of actual cross-disciplinary often projects that are, if not real, then an imitation of the real. And I think that's really what's driving at least the architectural education in Denmark.
Do you think that it's helpful that you are in contact with the quality of materials and design since you're children? Because I see that in Denmark, that actually the things of the daily use are, well made, well designed, etc. Actually, thrift shops in Denmark look like the gallery. And do you think that something maybe has influence on people? Maybe you don't even recognize it because you think it's obvious, but have you heard about it from someone else?
I mean, at least I think there's definitely a kind of a local pride in design and architecture, and a feeling that it's something that is part of what we can, you would say, be proud of as a country, and what we are, actually exporting as a commodity. So I think that is definitely present. I don't know. It's always hard to kind of, be all like, yeah, everything in Denmark is beautiful. I don't know if that's always the case, but I'm happy you think so.
Okay, so I will ask you if anyone has a last question. You have a last chance. So, yeah, great.
I got the chance to attend the Aarhus School of Architecture last semester. I love the building. Me and my buddies were wondering, perhaps if you would remake it these days, if it would be any different. We were specifically wondering, there's so much concrete. Was the I suppose like benchmark higher back then? You could emit more carbon, perhaps. Just interested about that.
Yeah, no. I think we would definitely do it differently today. That's one of the things that's been developing even within the school. The structure. I mean, the advantage of using concrete in that is that we were able to make so big spans and so big spaces that we were able to put wood construction inside it. But yeah, I think we would do it, and we would also be obliged to do it with a different footprint today. It's built with quite a low cost. So we also had to make a simple way, and at least in Denmark, it is still quite expensive to build at least big spans in wood construction. So you don't have a lot of, even now, you don't have a lot of big span wood construction buildings in Denmark. But it is, yeah, it is definitely something we've discussed.
Okay, thank you. So, anyone?
Do you have a favorite material to work with? Do you have like a list of materials you go through? And yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean definitely not for no. But I think we always try to you know, create something that is within the local conditions of where we work. So it's not like, you know, we generally use this facade like always like an alu plate or something like that. That's not the case. So you see New Ark, which is a very industrial building in an industrial area. You also see the Carlsberg building, which is more kind of traditional brick building, and you see more kind of the wood construction in some of the landscape projects. So I think that changes a lot. But of course, like one of the things we generally try to do when we work today is that we try to do bio-based materials on the inside of buildings, where they can last a long time, and then use as much as possible upcycled, more kind of technical materials on the exterior. Because at least in Denmark, using more bio-based materials is challenging. They deteriorate fast, and we are doing it in some places, but then it's with kind of quite big overhangs or with more kind of simple pavilion-like structures.
Great, thank you. So, the last question. You have a chance. Okay, so, yes, there is one question. You're amazing.
Yeah, my question is like, how do you like design the building that actually people can like be attached emotionally to the building, not just impressed by, like they want to stay there and spend some time here and not just like take a perfect picture and walk by?
I think it helps by doing something that people can engage with, like the School of Architecture, where they can be part of, and they can be so in that sense, I think it's about understanding architecture as something where that is a framework for life, not something that should define life within the buildings. So I think that's one thing. And then I think I also believe in doing what I've said a couple of times, but I think that the architecture as the new is not necessarily a quality, I think, for most people. I think architecture is something that supports what's there, is something that makes it easier for people to relate to and easier for everybody to love. I think maybe there's been like at least a period in Denmark where we've always tried to make these kind of new extraordinary pieces of architecture that always needed to stand out and be special. And I think you can be special in a more subtle way and stand out architecturally in a different way where it feels like something that is integrated in the context in what's there.
Okay, thank you very much. Anders Lonka.
Thank you. Thanks.
So thank you very much for attention, and as usually, recording of this lecture will be on YouTube, same as the short video camp minutes with Anders. So feel free to stay in camp for another hour and enjoy your evening, and see you somewhere, because camp is moving. That's the reason.